Master 2 or 3 decks and get really good at retreating. If you do those two things, I promise you, you will reach infinite this season, as that's what's got me there last season, and for the very first time in the Symbiote Spider-Man season. Despite what all the YouTube videos say, there isn't the deck that you need in order to reach infinite. Yes, the deck you play matters, and you does need to be competitive. You can't just play whatever you want, but you don't need the specific card. You don't need the perfectly meta deck with every card you can imagine in order to reach infinite. You need a deck that's competitive, and you need to play it well. In order to play it well, you got to master your deck and retreat. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a genius to understand that to reach infinite, you simply have to win more cubes than you lose. It's pretty straightforward. And you do that, you'll climb the ladder. In order to win cubes faster than you're losing cubes, you need to retreat when you're going to lose to minimize your losses, and you need to snap when you're going to win to maximize your gains. Again, not rocket science here. Anyone who's tried the ladder has understood this. But knowing when to snap, knowing when to retreat, particularly retreating, is what's essential to climb the ladder well. A big part of climbing the ladder is just not falling far down on the ladder. That's almost more essential to climbing the ladder effectively than climbing it fast. And in order to do both of those things, to snap smart and retreat smart, you really have to know your deck. You don't have to have the meta deck, you just have to know it. So how do you do that, and how do you retreat smart? I'll tell you both of those things. At the very end, I'll also give you some suggestions of how to build decks that are competitive, even if you don't have Series 3 complete or your collection level is low. Of course, you can use the chapters in the bottom to jump to that, but the reasons at the end is because the tips about mastering your deck and retreating are more important than those tips about building a deck. Building a deck is important, that's why it's included, but it's not as important as these other skills that truly are what get you to infinite. So talking about mastering the deck, I want to show you, to prove that you don't need the most meta deck, I'm going to show you the two decks that got me to infinite for the first time. The first was the Symbiote Spider-Man season, and that was this winning discard deck. It was before the rework with Swordmaster, so it was when he would hit a random card in your deck. So feel free to use this deck. It's a good one. Just switch out Swordmaster for something. But as you can see here, there's no Dracula, there's no Proxima Midnight, there's no Collector, those types of things. I didn't have those cards. I didn't have Dracula. I didn't have Proxima Midnight. But I knew this deck well, and I knew how to play it, and I knew when I was going to win, and I knew when I was going to lose. And it's also a competitive deck. Discard is a good deck. When that deck was having troubles getting me to climb, I got stuck in the 70s. I switched to a Mr. Negative deck. To prove my point here even more, this is not a fantastic Mr. Negative deck. It's a good one. It can be competitive, but it's not, the defining Mr. Negative deck. It lacks cards like Mystique, Ravonna Renslayer, Sage, Psylocke. Because of that, without the help of a location, there was no way that I was ever going to get Mr. Negative down on the board before turn 4. And so I was not going to have as many cards in my deck. That's why Psylocke and Ravonna Renslayer are such important cards to have. Well, I could kind of cheat a similar effect of just keeping the cards in my deck I wanted to be hit by Mr. Negative as long as possible by using Quicksilver and Domino, and also just keeping track of what cards I had with Howard the Duck. Of course, there were many times that I just completely abandoned the Mr. Negative line, and I went for the simple Symbiote, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Arnim Zola, and that one of the locations I needed. It got me to where I needed, I got me to the high 90s, and I switched back to this discard, and I reached infinite. Again, not the most meta decks. This is a pretty vanilla discard deck. I just played it well, and it was competitive. However, when we moved to the Agent Venom season, the Symbiote, We Are Venom season, my cards started moving around. Both of these decks really kind of relied on combos of cards being in the right place, particularly a Symbiote Spider-Man into MODOK to get a bunch of swarms and to build Morbius up pretty high. When my cards started moving around and people started messing with them and Cosmo became more prominent in the meta, it was messing with things, and I couldn't pull off those combos with either of these decks. So I switched to a bounce deck, and of course Agent Venom's in it because he's cracked, and this got me to infinite this season. So again, the deck isn't what matters. To make the point about the Mr. Negative deck, I did eventually get Psylocke and Mystique and Ravonna Renslayer, and I built a new Mr. Negative deck. Here it is. It's pretty good. This deck could not get me to infinite, where the other one that is less meta was able to get me to infinite. So an important part of mastering your deck is that when you go in to build your deck, you do have to be competitive. You could master whatever deck you want, but if it's not competitive, it's not going to be helpful. So build your deck. However you do that doesn't really matter. But build it. Pick a competitive deck and pick a deck that you enjoy playing as well. Then avoid ladder. Don't hit play, go into Conquest, and join the Proving Grounds. And play in Conquest in Proving Grounds over and over and over and over and over again so that you know your deck. What are your winning conditions? What are your losing conditions? What are locations that are really beneficial to you? What are locations that hurt you? What decks are you really good against? What decks are really good against you? Those types of things. What's the perfect opening hand that you should probably snap if you have? What's the perfect plan that if everything goes perfectly, this is the absolute winning condition and you're going to do amazing, pretty much unstoppable? And then what's the backup plan to that if you don't get that winning condition? What's your okay winning condition? The reason you're going to do this in Proving Grounds is because you can fail as many times as you need, and it will not influence your rank on ladder. It's important that as you're learning to give yourself an environment to try snapping without ruining your chances in ladder. An important part of this is knowing when to retreat and knowing when to snap. So practice that in Proving Grounds as you are mastering your deck. Hey, I feel like this is a pretty good hand. Harrison told me that I should snap if I have this opening hand. I feel like this is that, so I'm going to snap. Did it work out? Did your opponent retreat? Or did you get more cubes and get that 8-cube game, right? Practice all of those things in an environment where it's not going to affect your rank on ladder. Practice over and over and over and over and over again. You'll know your deck. You'll know what cards are in your deck. You know what you need to do to win, of where you need to have your card placements to pull off combos, of what cards should be in similar locations together, that type of thing, how to respond to an opponent and how to counter those decks, those types of things. Ultimately, you're learning your deck just so that you can play it well, so that you feel confident in the cards you're playing and how you're playing them, that it's going to get you to a winning state. Of course, if you pick out a deck and you build it, you go into Proving Grounds and you begin to master it, and you just can't win, even when you know the deck well, you may need to build a new deck. Some decks just aren't competitive in the meta. So, try something new and go back to Proving Grounds and master the deck. When you feel like you found a deck that's competitive and you've mastered, the step to understand before you go into ladder is how to retreat smart. And you can practice this while you're in Proving Grounds, so you're mastering your deck and mastering retreating at the same time, so then you can go to ladder and climb and reach infinite. So retreating smart. You need to understand it is better to retreat and lose 1 or 2 cubes than stay in the game and potentially lose 4. For whatever reason, it took me a lot of time to realize that retreating was not a bad thing. That it's somehow, for me, retreating was like worse than losing. And so I was not reaching infinite until I realized retreating is in the game to help me reach infinite. It's an essential game mechanic. It's such an important part of the game that there is a location that affects your ability to retreat because it's such a significant thing. Retreating is an important part of Marble Snap, and it is an essential skill to help you climb the ladder because it will help you lose less cubes, and that's essential to just keep gaining more and climbing the ladder. So smart retreating is simply, as you know your deck, are you in a losing situation? Has your opponent just got a perfect combo and you've only had an okay combo? Are you just not drawing the cards that you need? Did your opponent do something that shut down? Did they play the Cosmo on you perfectly? Did a location lock you out of a combo that you were planning on? That type of thing. If so, just retreat. If you're in a situation that's just kind of iffy, you're on turn 4, 5, or 6, and your opponent has snapped and the game is about to roll over, unless you're super confident, just leave. It's not worth it. Retreat before the game increases in cubes and your losings increase as well. Be patient as you do this. You may go on a losing streak. Retreat at 1 cube, switch it up, take a break, that type of thing. You can do it. If your deck is competitive, there are games that you are going to win. And part of that is also snapping smart when you are going to win. Try and get those 8-cube games. But at the same time, be kind of careful. Sometimes it's not worth it to snap because you're going to wait and the game's going to roll over to 2 cubes and you'll win 2 cubes. But you snapped to try and earn 4, but your opponent retreated and now you've only won 1. Sure, the difference between 1 and 2 cubes isn't big, but a difference between 2 and 4 cubes is. So sometimes it's about just playing it out. Also, because you don't want, unless you're like absolutely certain you're going to win, snapping isn't smart. Sometimes it's okay to play out a 2-cube game if you're only somewhat certain you're going to win. It's okay to lose 2 cubes. It's even okay to lose 8 because that will happen. But retreat smart when you can. If you want some help with snapping, especially if you're confident that you're going to win, because you also don't want your opponent to retreat, you can just kind of play with your opponent. There's a few games where I've won an 8-cube game, particularly in Conquest, where on turn 5 or 6, I emote in such a way. I say I'm losing, I do the R, I do the Deadpool face, and I don't play my cards well. To reveal on turn 6 an explosive play that they weren't expecting, and I know I'm going to win. They stayed around, they maybe even snapped, so they're feeling confident because I'm bluffing. It's okay to bluff to your opponent and then steal those cubes from them in the process. So I'm trying to drag this out to convince you how important it is to retreat, but the mechanic is simple. When you're losing, just retreat. The only reason I keep blabbing about it is because I want you to believe me, because it took me serious convincing that retreating is the smart way to play. Winning players who reach infinite retreat. I promise you. Even this season and the season before, as I'm working my way up the ladder here, retreating is still an essential part of my strategy and making sure I can reach infinite. So, you'd like some help building your decks? I've got a few ideas. Like I already mentioned, there is this discard deck. I would switch out something for Swordmaster. This is a really, really good deck. If you've got Scorn, you can go that. If you've got a lower collection level, don't worry about playing the most meta cards ever. Discard is really good. Ultron, Patriot decks are really good. This deck is actually really, really fun and kind of surprises people, especially if you're on turn 7. And then you play Sarah in turn 5 and skip turn 6. You can usually play She-Hulk, Infinite, and then, an arrow from Hawkeye or something. Or you can play Hawkeye and Mirage, and then you'll boost up your collector. Like, this is actually a really fun deck. Maybe I'll make a video about it. I don't know how it's going to do in this meta because it doesn't get huge like these Surtur decks are. You usually win one location pretty big and then a second only okay. But that's a really, really good deck. Ongoing decks with Onslaught are huge, and it's an easy place to have Cosmo. Scream decks are really good. Of course, there's this Agatha deck that's actually a pretty good Agatha deck, right? You can. But the thing is, I don't want you to get focused on my decks. What cards do you have, and what cards do you enjoy playing? The cards that are worth playing, that are competitive. Bounce decks are really, really competitive. Even if you have a lower collection level, I made a video about building a Toxin deck with Series 1 cards only, and I actually won a few games. You obviously, if you have Toxin, you have Series 2 and Series 3 cards, even if you don't have all the Series 3, and you can pepper those in and make that deck even better. Bounce is a great location to start because you have a lot of cards. If you've got Falcon or Beast or Toxin, there's a lot of cards that you have early that fit into a bounce deck pretty competitively. So if you've got either one of those 3 cards, Beast, Toxin, or Falcon, bounce might be a good place to start if your collection level is lower. Ongoing with Onslaught, again, is a really place to go because you have a lot of ongoing cards that benefit from Onslaught really well. And if you're lower in the collection, you're playing against players who have lower collection levels, so you're not getting huge numbers coming out. I've already mentioned discard. Good old vanilla APOC discard is just a pretty reliable deck. If you're playing it well, you can drop a 20 or 24 powered discard or APOC on turn 6, and that's huge. Destroy, I don't play Destroy, but old reliable. It's the deck that's been around for 2 years. Destroy is pretty good. You can get a lot of those cards pretty early on as well. Of course, you may miss things like Death. You may not have Null. I still don't have Null. I don't have X23, right? You may not have the most meta Destroy deck, but Destroy is also a good place to start and is pretty consistent. Mr. Negative is another good way to go. Patriot, if you have him, you can go a Patriot Ultron route, Patriot Debris route, that type of thing, Patriot Dr. Doom route, that type of thing. But also use untapped.gg to figure out what the data is. I will particularly be releasing a video on a few deck ideas that are going to be really effective against the very prominent Surtur decks that are everywhere because people are enjoying that, myself included. It's a really fun deck to play. There's certain decks and certain cards that are going to be particularly impactful against that. So like an anti-meta deck, those decks can do well. But I'm being vague here because the deck building is unique and it's up to you. I don't know what cards you do and don't have and what you're missing. But find a good collection. If you have a lot of ongoing cards, if you've already got in your Series 3 collections Beast and Falcon, and you picked up Toxin with your keys or something, well then obviously Bounce is a great place to start. Even if you're missing key cards like Thena or Agent Venom, you don't need those to still build a competitive Bounce deck. So go out there, build your deck, try it out. Look at other content creators who release decks. There's many resources to help you in deck building. But after you build the deck, practice with it. Is it competitive in the current meta? Against the cards that you're playing frequently, is it competitive? If so, master that deck. Get really good at it, get confident with it, and learn how to retreat with it. Then go to ladder, and I promise if you're patient with the process, you will reach infinite this season, as that's what got me to infinite the first time, and is going to get me to infinite this season, as I'm almost there. Anyway, happy snapping, and good luck. Editor Harrison here, jumping in because I forgot a tip for finding good decks and building decks that is actually pretty crucial and really beneficial. It's actually how I found my favorite current Surfer deck. Let me pull it up here. So in the game, just go and visit your alliance. And then in the corner of your alliance, you have this little chat window. This is the snap bot that keeps track of any of the decks in your alliance that have won an 8-cube game. So you can scroll through and look at each of these decks, and then you can simply copy the deck to your clipboard and paste it to build the deck. So then when you go to copy your deck, you come up here, you paste your deck, and it will say, you do not have all... Oh, you can't see. You do not have all the cards. Okay, well, I'm going to paste now anyway, and I'm going to have one card missing, so then I can go and add whatever. Right, pretty straightforward. Have fun. You can do it. See you in Infinite. Happy snapping.